This is Mick, the Doctor of Digital.
And welcome to Music 101. Music 101 is created to empower music itself and legendary icon in the music industry. Another week, another great episode. The Sacred Sound Music Journey from Christian Foundation to AI Amoral algorithm.
Yeah, so this is an interesting look. So this is going to be talking about classical music to rock and right up to contemporary music and how AI is changing the music industry. So where did music come from, where it's been, and maybe where it's going to go. We'll see.
We'll see. So, Mr. Mick, let me start with the foundational questions that shapes everything we're about to discuss. Was Western classical music actually built on Christian moral foundations?
Absolutely, and the historical evidence is overwhelming. Western classical music didn't emerge in a cultural vacuum. It was literally born in the monasteries and cathedrals of medieval Europe. Gregorian chant, which David Hiley calls the mother tongue of Western music in his Cambridge study, established the fundamental principles that would govern musical composition for centuries. Think about what the Gregorian chant represented. This wasn't entertainment music or self expression, it was prayer made audible. The early Christian fathers understood music as a direct pathway to the divine. Augustine wrote in his Confessions about being moved to tears by sacred song, describing how the voices flowed into my ears and the truth was poured into my heart. This wasn't a metaphor, it was theology translated into sound. The modal system that emerged from the chant established musical rules based on spiritual principles. Each mode was understood to evoke different aspects of divine character: the Dorian mode for solemnity and reverence, the Lydian for joy and celebration. Willie Oppel's comprehensive study of Gregorian chant documents how these weren't arbitrary musical choices, but delivered expressions of Christian cosmology, where harmony in music reflected the harmony of God's creation. This foundation shaped everything that followed. The development of polyphony in the 12th and 13th centuries wasn't just musical innovation, it was a theological statement. When Leonin and Perrontin began weaving multiple melodic lines together at Notre Dame Cathedral, they were expressing the Christian doctrine of unity within diversity, the Trinitarian understanding that multiple persons could exist in perfect harmony within one divine essence. The mathematical ratios governing consonance and dissonance came directly from Christian Platonism. Boethius, whose treatise on music was the standard music theory text for centuries, explicitly connected musical harmony to divine order. In conclusion, music wasn't just a beautiful sound, it was participation in the music of the spheres, the cosmic harmony that reflected God's rational nature.
Mr. Mick, Western music was fundamentally theological from its origins, but how does Christian foundation specifically shape the great classical composers?
Western music was fundamentally theological from its origins. This foundation reaches its pinnacle with someone like Johann Sebastian Bach, who represents the complete integration of Christian faith and musical genius. John Eliot Gardner's biography demonstrates how Bach saw composition as literal worship. He inscribed Solo Deo Gloria, that's to the glory of God, on his manuscripts, not as mere piety, but as a theological statement. Every fugue, every cantata, every choral was an act of praise. Bach's musical architecture mirrors Christian doctrine. The well tempered clavier isn't just a technical exercise in all 24 keys, it's a musical expression of divine completeness, the perfection of God's creation explored through every possible tonal relationship. His fugues embody the theological concept of divine unity emerging from complexity, where multiple independent voices resolve into perfect harmonic order. Consider the St. Matthew Passion. This isn't simply a musical setting of Christ's crucifixion, it's a sophisticated theological meditation that uses musical language to convey spiritual truths. The way Bach treats Peter's denial with its descending chromatic lines and harmonic instability musically depicts the spiritual anguish of betrayal. When the crowd cries, "Crucify him," Bach writes jagged, violent rhythms that make the listener viscerally experience moral chaos. Even composers who moved away from strict orthodoxy remain shaped by this Christian foundation. Martin Geck's study of Bach shows how Protestant theology, with its emphasis on individual conscience and direct relationship with God, influenced the personal, introspective quality of Baroque composition. The Lutheran emphasis on scripture created music that was both deeply emotional and intellectually rigorous. Beethoven presents a particularly interesting case. William Kinderman's research challenges the conventional view of Beethoven as a secular humanist, arguing that his Catholic upbringing profoundly shaped his musical worldview, even in his personal faith as an evolution. The Missa Solemnis isn't just religious music, it's a wrestling with faith itself, using musical language to explore doubt, hope, suffering, and transcendence. The moral dimension here is crucial. These composers understood music as having inherent ethical significance. Beauty wasn't neutral, it pointed toward truth and goodness. Dissonance wasn't just harmonic tension, it represented moral conflict that demanded resolution. In conclusion, the entire classical tradition operated on the assumption that music could make people better, that harmony in sound could cultivate harmony in soul.
Mr. Mick, classical music embodied Christian moral purpose through its very structure. But how do this foundation begin to shift as a music move into popular forms?
Classical music embodied Christian moral purpose through its very structure. The transition to popular music represents a fascinating evolution where Christian moral foundations initially remained strong but gradually transformed. Gospel music, emerging from African American Christian communities, maintained the spiritual intensity of classical sacred music but added emotional directness and participatory energy that classical forms often lacked. Gospel represented something revolutionary, sacred music that was both deeply theological and immediately accessible. When Thomas Dorsey pioneered modern gospel in the 1930s, he wasn't abandoning Christian musical tradition, but translating it into vernacular language. Songs like Precious Lord maintained the harmonic sophistication of classical tradition while embracing the emotional honesty of blues and spirituals. This created a bridge between the formal sacred structure and emerging popular forms. Gospel's call and response structure embodied the Christian understanding of prayer as dialogue with the divine. The use of improvisation reflected theological concepts of divine inspiration and the Holy Spirit moving through human expression. Even the rhythm, the driving beat that made bodies move, was understood as a celebration of embodied spirituality, rejecting the false dualism that separated physical and spiritual experience. R&B and early soul music emerged directly from this gospel foundation, carrying forward its moral sensibility even as the subject matter became more secular. Listen to Sam Cooke's transition from gospel to popular music in 1963. Songs like A Change Is Gonna Come maintain gospel's moral urgency and spiritual depth while addressing social justice. The musical language remained essentially sacred even when applied to temporal concerns. The Motown song of the 1960s represents perhaps the last major popular movement with clear moral foundations. Berry Gordy consciously created music that would unite rather than divide, that would present positive role models and celebrate love, commitment, and human dignity. Songs like The Supremes' Where Did Our Love Go? Or The Temptations' My Girl operated within clear moral frameworks: love as commitment, relationships as sacred, human connection as precious. But even in this era, you begin to see the foundations shifting. The increasing emphasis on individual expression, the growing influence of secular psychology and therapeutic culture, the rise of consumer capitalism that turned music into a product rather than art, all of these forces began eroding the assumption that music should serve a moral purpose. The British invasion brought a more ambivalent relationship to traditional moral frameworks. The Beatles began with relatively innocent themes, but gradually embraced countercultural values that challenged Christian moral assumptions. In conclusion, by the time you reach songs like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds or I Am the Walrus, you're in territory that explicitly rejecting rational moral discourse in favor of surreal, drug influenced consciousness exploration.
Popular music maintained moral foundation through gospel and early soul, but began fragmented by the 1960s. What happened when music became fully secularized?
Popular music maintained moral foundations through gospel and early soul, but began fragmenting in the 1960s. The full secularization of music represents one of the most dramatic cultural shifts in human history, and its consequences have been profound and largely destructive. The 1970s marked a turning point where music began systematically rejecting not just Christian moral frameworks in favor of the framework of outrage. Punk rock embodied this most explicitly. Bands like the Sex Pistols and Dead Kennedys weren't just rebelling against specific moral rules, but against the entire concept that music should serve any purpose beyond self expression and shock value. God Save the Queen wasn't just anti monarchist, it was nihilistic, rejecting the possibility of transcendent meaning or purpose. Hip hop's emergence in the late 1970s initially maintained some connection to moral discourse, particularly through its prophetic tradition. Early rap often functioned as social commentary, with artists like Grandmaster Flash addressing urban decay and social injustice. But as the genre evolved and became commercialized, it increasingly embraced what can only be called anti moral messaging, celebrating violence, materialism, misogyny, and immediate gratification. The psychological research on this shift is disturbing. Studies consistently show that exposure to music with antisocial lyrics increases aggressive behavior, reduces empathy, and normalizes harmful attitudes towards women and relationships. The American Psychological Association's research demonstrates clear correlations between consuming music that celebrates violence and sexual exploitation and adopting similar values and behaviors. It's not causation, but there can be a connection between antisocial music when young people are already troubled. But the deeper problem is philosophical. Secular music culture has embraced what Friedrich Nietzsche called transvaluation of all values, the systemic rejection of traditional moral categories. Without a transcendent purpose, music becomes a purely aesthetic experience, judged only on whether it provides pleasure, excitement, or emotional stimulation. The classical understanding of beauty as connected to truth and goodness is completely abandoned. This shows up in the content, but also in the form. Modern pop music increasingly relies on repetitive, hypnotic structures that bypass rational thought and appeal directly to brain chemistry. The rise of electronic music, auto tune vocals, and algorithmically generated hooks creates what is essentially musical drug delivery, designed to trigger dopamine responses rather than cultivate wisdom, virtue, or spiritual growth. Rock and metal genres have explicitly embraced dark spiritual themes, often celebrating rebellion against divine authority, occult imagery, and what can only be described as demonic aesthetics. Bands like Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden, and countless death metal bands don't reject Christian moral foundations, but they actively encourage their inversion. And for those kids struggling with mental health issues or without a moral foundation, youth can be susceptible to questionable influences. The commodification of music under consumer capitalism has accelerated this moral decay. When music becomes primarily a product to be consumed rather than art to be contemplated, the incentive structure changes completely. What sells isn't necessarily what elevates or ignobles, it's what triggers immediate psychological responses. Sex, violence, rebellion, and transgression become marketing strategies rather than authentic expressions of human experience. The result is a musical culture that systemically undermines the psychological and spiritual foundations necessary for mature human relationships, stable communities, and meaningful life purpose. In conclusion, we've created a sonic environment that literally makes people worse, more narcissistic, more impulsive, more disconnected from transcendent purpose.
Mr. Mig, secularized music abandoned moral purpose and began actively undermining human flourishing. Now we are facing artificial intelligence creating music. What moral foundation does AI operate from?
The emergence of AI in music creation represents the logical endpoint of this moral evacuation. And it's deeply troubling because AI operates from no moral foundation whatsoever. AI is fundamentally amoral, not immoral. It has no conception of good and evil, beauty and ugliness, or purpose and meaninglessness. Current AI music systems like OpenAI's MuseNet, Google's Magenta, or the various AI composers emerging in the market operate purely on pattern recognition and statistical probability. They analyze massive data sets of existing music and generate new combinations based on mathematical relationships between sounds. But they have no understanding of why certain musical choices might be beautiful, meaningful, or morally significant. This represents something unprecedented in human history. Every musical tradition, Christian, Islamic, Hindu, Buddhist, and even secular humanist, has operated from some conception of transcendent purpose or meaning. AI has none. It can't distinguish between a Bach chorale that elevates the spirit and a death metal song that celebrates violence, except in terms of frequency patterns and rhythmic structures. Unwittingly, Black Sabbath reproduced devilish music, but AI without comprehension can digitally produce sonic horror. The implications are staggering. When AI generates music, it's essentially creating a sophisticated pastiche of whatever data it's been fed, with no capacity to evaluate whether that music serves human flourishing or undermines it. If you train AI on a data set heavy with aggressive, nihilistic, or sexually exploitive music, it will generate more of the same, not because it intends harm, but because it cannot conceive of harm as a meaningful category. This connects to broader concerns about AI alignment and value learning. Stuart Russell's research on artificial intelligence safety demonstrates that AI systems optimized for narrow objectives without built in moral constraints can produce profoundly harmful outcomes. In music, this might mean AI that becomes incredibly sophisticated at triggering addictive responses, manipulating emotions, or reinforcing destructive behavioral patterns simply because these techniques are statistically effective at capturing attention. The cultural implications are even more disturbing. As AI becomes more prevalent in music creation, we risk institutionalizing moral nihilism at the level of cultural production. Human musicians competing with AI systems that can generate endless variations at near zero cost may feel pressured to embrace increasingly extreme content simply to differentiate themselves from algorithmic creation. We're already seeing this with streaming platforms that use AI recommendation algorithms. These systems optimize for engagement metrics, time spent listening, repeat plays, sharing behavior, rather than any conception of what music might be good for human beings. The result is algorithmic amplification of whatever content is most psychologically addictive, regardless of its moral impact. The theological dimension here is profound. Christianity understood music as participation in divine creativity, where human composers served as co creators with God, channeling transcendent beauty into temporal sound. AI represents the complete inversion of this understanding: creativity without consciousness, pattern generation without purpose, technical sophistication without wisdom. From a practical standpoint, AI music threatens to create what we might call moral muzak, an omnipresent sonic environment that is aesthetically sophisticated but spiritually empty. Imagine a world where most music is generated by systems that can perfectly mimic a human emotional expression, but have no understanding of what emotions are for, no conception of what emotions should be cultivated and which should be disciplined. In conclusion, the danger isn't just that AI will create bad music, it's that AI will normalize the assumption that music doesn't need moral purpose, that artistic creation can be divorced from wisdom and virtue, that beauty is just a matter of triggering the right neurochemical responses.
AI operates without any moral foundation, Mr. Mick, potentially institutionalizing nihilism in music creation. But let's get specific about what's happening right now. How is AI actually changing classical music, rock, and the entire music industry?
The immediate transformation happening all across musical genres is both revolutionary and deeply concerning because it's occurring without any moral framework to guide it. In classical music, AI is being used to complete unfinished works by masters like Schubert and Mozart, but this raises profound questions about artistic authenticity and creative authority. When an AI system completes Schubert's unfinished symphony, as several projects have attempted, whose work are we actually hearing? The algorithmic generation lacks the spiritual struggle, personal suffering, and transcendent aspiration that made Schubert's original fragments meaningful. Huawei used the AI's abilities to complete Symphony Number 8 with the same style in which Schubert composed it. We get technical competence without the moral and spiritual depth that defines great classical music. More troubling, orchestras are beginning to use AI for real time composition and arrangement, allowing pieces to be modified during performance based on audience response data. This transforms classical music from an artistic statement into a consumer product optimization, completely inverting the traditional relationship between composer, performer, and audience that has defined the genre for centuries. Rock music faces even more dramatic disruption. AI can now generate guitar riffs, drum patterns, and even entire songs in specific subgenres styles with remarkable accuracy. Bands are using AI to write hooks, develop arrangements, and even create vocal melodies. But rock music historically emerged from personal authenticity, emotional rawness, and cultural rebellion, qualities that AI cannot possess or genuinely express. One such example is using a bot to write an AC/DC song. The result is technically proficient music that feels hollow because it lacks the human experience that gives rock its power. When an AI generates a song about heartbreak or social injustice, it's simply recombining linguistic and musical patterns without any experience of pain or moral conviction. This threatens to turn rock into sonic wallpaper, aesthetically sophisticated but spiritually empty. The broader music industry transformation is even more extensive. Streaming platforms now use AI to generate personalized playlists, predict hit songs, and even create background music tailored to individual psychological profiles. Spotify's algorithm knows your listening habits better than you do and can manipulate your emotional state through carefully curated musical experiences. Record labels are investing heavily in AI composition tools that can generate radio ready tracks in minutes rather than months, dramatically reducing production costs while eliminating human creative input. This industrialization of music creation treats artistic expression as a manufacturing process, optimizing for commercial efficiency rather than human meaning. The process spins Motown on its head, which employed a human automobile manufacturing process to produce heartfelt human music with social and political significance. More concerning is the rise of AI generated virtual artists, completely artificial performers with algorithmically created personalities, voices, and even visual appearances. These digital entities can release unlimited content, tour virtually, and maintain perfect public images without the messiness of human creativity, emotion, or moral complexity. This represents the complete commodification of artistic persona, reducing musicians to brand management exercises. The Velvet Sundown is one of the latest examples of a totally virtual, non existent band with songs. The psychological implications are staggering. When people develop emotional connections to AI generated music and artificial performers, they're essentially forming parasocial relationships with sophisticated marketing algorithms. In conclusion, this further isolates individuals from authentic human connection while creating the illusion of meaningful artistic engagement.
Mr. Mick, rebuilding musical cultures requires integrating proper moral foundations with technological wisdom. What is your final message about music future?
Well, When we're rebuilding musical culture, it creates integrating proper moral foundations with technological wisdom. Here's what everyone needs to understand. We stand at an unprecedented crossroads where the choices we make about music and technology in the next decade will shape human culture for generations to come. Music has never been more powerful or more dangerous than it is right now. We have technological capabilities that would astonish previous general civilizations, the ability to create, distribute, and consume virtually unlimited musical content, to generate new compositions through artificial intelligence, to reach global audiences instantly. But we're deploying these incredible capabilities without moral wisdom, like giving dangerous weapons to children. The stakes couldn't be higher. Music shapes consciousness more directly than almost any other cultural force. What people listen to literally rewires their brains, affects their emotional regulation, influences their relationships, and forms their understanding of what human life is for. When we abandon moral purpose in music, we're not just creating bad art, we're systemically damaging the psychological and spiritual foundations that make civilization possible. But here's the profound hope: truth is more powerful than error, beauty more compelling than ugliness, and goodness proves more satisfying than evil. The great sacred musical traditions, from Gregorian chant to Bach's cantata to the finest contemporary secular music, represent humanity at its most noble, most creative, most connected to transcendent purpose. These traditions don't need to be defended, they need to be extended, applied, and translated for new technological contexts. The creation of JC, the first virtual AI gospel artist, sparked controversy about authenticity and the nature of worship. The question isn't whether AI will impact Christian music, it already has, but how the church will navigate this transformation. The future likely holds hybrid approaches where AI serves as a sophisticated compositional tool while human creativity provides theological insight and spiritual authenticity. While AI may compose melodies that move us emotionally, the transformative power of worship music traditionally stems from human origins. Music isn't going away, artificial intelligence isn't going away. The question is whether these powerful forces will serve human flourishing or accelerate cultural decay. The choice is still ours to make, but the window for making it may be closing rapidly. This isn't just about music, it's about whether human culture will be shaped by wisdom or algorithms, beauty or efficiency, love or optimization. In conclusion, the choice is ours and the time is now.
The time is now for sure, and very well said, Mr. Mig. Totally, totally inspiring. Yes, people from the hallowed halls of Gregorian chart, where melody was a divine prayer inherited to devise the soul toward the heavens, to the silent humming service of digital age, where music is generated by moral algorithms and parsing datasets. The journeys of sounds is a profound mirror of our shifting worldview to the world. Mr. Mick, would you like to plug in something?
Thanks. I appreciate the opportunity. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, create a valued book in 90 days, GMIC, the Doctor of Digital Smith. You can also pick up a couple volumes on Amazon, Burning America and On Track Ian Hunter, and listen to a podcast, the Doctor of Digital podcast.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Mick, the Doctor Digital, because, well, more and more empowering episodes of the podcast, and for sure, more empowering authors to come. And please do listen to our baby podcast, Mental Health 101. Mental Health 101 is created to bring us awareness of our mental health. So, Mr. Mike, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, my friend. Until next time, a Deus Volt.
Welcome, people. See you soon.